Welcome everybody. We'll just wait for a few minutes, a couple of minutes, just to get everybody aboard and we'll get underway. Right, yeah, we'll kick off. My name is Philip Aldridge, the Executive Director at Hazend. Welcome to this webinar today. So today's webinar has been led by Dr. John Fitzgerald. We'll be talking about the mentally healthy work program at WorkSafe. So it's a great agenda. And John's background is a registered clinical psychologist who joined WorkSafe from Massey University earlier this year. He has just completed a term as president of the New Zealand Psychological Society, and he's worked in clinical psychology for over 30 years, so he's got background in terms of leading this program at WorkSafe. So today, John will outline the goals and activities he's leading. He'll also share his thoughts on good elements or key elements of a good psychological program in the workplace, and ideally give some good examples. So I'll hand across to John shortly, but in terms of format, so John's going to talk about more interactive discussion over the next 30-40 minutes, followed by a Q&A. So at the bottom of the screen in right middle is a Q&A button there, so put your questions in as we talk, and then we'll talk about those as we get through the webinar. In terms of logistics, the copy of the presentation recording will go out tomorrow. So over to you, John.
Kia ora, everybody. Thank you very much, Philip, for that introduction. Let me just share this with you. Okay, so thanks for the opportunity to present today. I'll be talking about the mentally healthy work, just a program update from WorkSafe New Zealand, and the first part of the presentation is just going to be a little bit of background to talk about how we understand what mentally healthy work is and why it's important, and then moving on to a little bit more practical detail about sectors and our work program. What I would like to start with, though, is a couple of things. First is just recognizing that this is not a piece of work that WorkSafe can do on its own, that we have three particular levers that we engage with, or that we can use, and the first is engagement and education and enforcement. And WorkSafe, being the health and safety regulator, is the agency, is the organisation that will engage in enforcement, including around mentally healthy work if necessary. But that is not our preferred way of working for all sorts of reasons. That if we have an emphasis on engaging with sectors, engaging with industries, engaging with health and safety reps, engaging with workplace leaders, engaging with workers, this is a piece of work that everybody needs to be involved in, because the benefits are significant. When I arrived at WorkSafe middle of the year, I didn't come here because I was particularly looking for another job, because I had a job I was perfectly happy in. The reason I came is because if, as a country, we do this right, we can make a difference to hundreds of thousands of people. We can significantly reduce the distress caused by bullying and harassment in the workplace. We can significantly reduce the problems that occur, including injury and potentially including death from high workplace stress and people working when they're too fatigued and they've got lots of other things on their mind. So this is a really important really important piece of work, and it's something that WorkSafe want to engage with the sector and the country on. The other thing I want to mention is just Brock Chisholm always seems to come up at the beginning of any talks I give, and Brock Chisholm was the first Director General of the World Health Organization back in the 1950s. And while he didn't actually say these words, he's credited with the sentiment, which is no health without mental health. What that says to me is that that mental health needs to be on the map. But what it also says is that physical and mental health are intimately entwined, that you can't have one without the other, that the two go together. And it's for this reason that at WorkSafe, mentally healthy work sits within the health unit, and we work closely with our other colleagues who are doing other aspects of health work to bring a comprehensive sense of what health is. So mentally healthy work is part of everybody's work. It may not always be the primary focus, but mentally healthy work needs to become business as usual, not an add-on. It needs to be part of everything we do in the workplace. I'll just show you, this is the team that we put together. So I am the lead for mentally healthy work team at WorkSafe, and we're all based on Custom House Quay in Wellington. The other team members are Vanessa Cooper, who's our a mentally healthy work specialist, and Ruth Pink and Paula McKenzie, who are our senior advisors. So Ruth is focused on external development and Paula on internal development. These people come with a wealth of experience and knowledge from a really broad range of industries and sectors. The reason I'm putting their pictures up is if you come down to Wellington, we would love to meet with you. And if you see these people in Countdown, or I'm not sure where they shop, when they shop at Countdown or New World or wherever they shop, please say hello to them. That an important part of the work we do, if we're focusing on engagement as being one of the levers, is the importance of networking. So we are a team that is going to be working with all of you guys out there to improve mentally healthy work around New Zealand. These are things I'm going to talk briefly about, pretty much in this order, apart from the last one, which covers everything. So the first is to emphasize that positive mental health is good for people and productivity. If we think about why a PCBU, why a company should be interested in mentally healthy work, there is a point that that good mental health is good for business. Because it's a corollary of poor mental health is bad for business, and I'll provide some data about that. If you think about it, though, that one of the challenges of mentally healthy work is its sort of subtle nature. That if you're on a work site and you get hit by a tree, it's very obvious that you've been hit by a tree, I'd guess, or you get run over by a truck. It's very obvious what's happened. Mentally healthy work is more subtle and does rely to some extent on objectivity, and it's people's experience of being in a mentally unhealthy workplace, and that can change from time to time and from person to person. But mentally healthy work is good for productivity, and it's good for people. PCBUs under Health and Safety at Work Act do have an obligation to identify and eliminate risks, and these are risks to mental health as well as physical health, as far as reasonably or practically possible. And one of the jobs we are charged with is being clear about what those risks are, and being supportive of PCBUs in that activity of reducing, identifying, eliminating the risks as much as possible. The risks seem to fall into three main areas. The first of those are associated with work design or poor work design. The second are risks associated with the work environment. And the third, and perhaps the most significant in terms of mentally healthy work, it's about the relationships that people have at work, about their social and organizational context. There are also some individual factors. The first three factors are dynamic, that they change. Individual factors are more likely to be static factors. They're more likely to be things that we can't probably do very much about. The last point there is just an overall development in the orientation of at WorkSafe, and it's an orientation towards better work. And this is about attending to the fact that when things go right, they don't go wrong. And we want to focus more on what's going right and why it's going right, to look at companies that are doing this well and learn from them, learn from their example, and place their example in front of other people. So we need to ask ourselves, what does mentally healthy work look like? And can we identify businesses that are doing mentally healthy work well? And we certainly can. So quickly, just look at some definitions of what we mean by mentally healthy work. Well, first definition of mental health. So mental health is defined as, this is called World Health Organization, defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and be able to make a contribution to his or her community. The thing I'll draw your attention to in this definition is that it doesn't focus on illness, that here we're talking about mental health. This is actually what we want to achieve, that it's not defined as an absence of illness. Actually, it's about more than that. It's about realizing potential. And if we transfer that across to a definition that WorkSafe has about mentally healthy work, so mentally healthy work is where risks to people's mental health are eliminated or minimized, and their well-being is prioritized. And that's an important point. Again, the focus here is on prioritizing mental well-being. It's a positive thing. It's not just about eliminating or minimizing risks. That actually we want mentally healthy workplaces to be business as usual. And to do that, we have to understand what a mentally healthy workplace is and support PCBUs to get to that place. But we do have a definition of mental harm. Both these last two definitions have come from our own position statement, which was released in September this year. So what is mental harm? Mental harm, significant cognitive, emotional, or behavioral impact arising from or exacerbated by work-related risk factors, and I'll look at those in a minute. Mental harm may be immediate or long-term and can come from a single or repeated event, or exposure to risks. And the second sentence is really important, that it's not about a single event. It can happen immediately. Mental harm can happen immediately, but it can happen long term. It can be a gradual process. It doesn't have to happen just from a single event. It can be from repeated exposure. So if you look on the WorkSafe website and you look at the definition of bullying, you see that that actually does require repeated exposures. So why? So what is mental harm, and why is good mental health important to PCBUs? You're 15 times more likely to die from a work-related illness than you are from a work-related injury or accident. So it's actually the illnesses, it's the more gradual things that are more likely to take your life rather than being hit by a truck or being hit by a log or something like that. So what are these gradual process injuries? Well, it can include being exposed to dusts, to carcinogens. It can include exposure to other toxic chemicals, but it can also include the consequences of working in a mentally unhealthy workplace. Reduced mental health is now the primary cause of lost working days in most westernized countries, and if you look at the third bullet point there, that it's estimated that mental health problems cost New Zealand businesses approximately $1.6 billion per year. So this is a major cost, and these are not workplace injuries or accidents in terms of physical injuries. These are to do with mental health and mentally unhealthy work. The very good Massey University Workplace Barometer study, the second report reported in 2020, showed that nearly half workers reported scores indicating potentially high exposure to psychosocial risks, and this includes things like workplace strain and depression. So these are not just costly to New Zealand's workplaces, but they are pretty pervasive, pretty broadly spread. We know that about 15% of people working in New Zealand are exposed to bullying or harassment. That's 300,000 workers in New Zealand. So that's a huge number of people. Another slide here, just giving some more examples. It's estimated, as I said, that the mental health cost to New Zealand businesses is about 1.6 billion per year. That stress has risen by a net of 23.5% across New Zealand businesses in the past 2 years. That in 2018, New Zealand lost 7.3 million working days, and that's $1.79 billion due to absence, some of which would be related to mental health, but some would be related to other things. The 17% of disability adjusted life years are lost in New Zealand due to mental health problems. It's interesting that that's not the largest category, that actually musculoskeletal disease or disorders results in 23% of disability adjusted life years, but that's way more than the 11% that are lost to acute injury, or less than 0.5% that are related to catastrophic harm. So these gradual things, these things that build up over a period of time and are distressing and debilitating as more of a gradual process injury, account for much more lost productivity than the physical harms do. The bottom left box, I think, is positive. So positive work environments are beneficial to mental health. They're characterized by feelings of inclusion, fairness, and management competence. And I think, again, if we look back at the Massey's Workplace Barometer study, there's a lot of evidence there about the psychosocial safety climate and how people feeling safe and workplaces engaging more in health and safety. It's beneficial to workers, and because it's beneficial to workers, it's beneficial to productivity. So where are we going? Where are we aiming for? If we're aiming to understand what the risks are and use that as a way of reducing harm, rather than specifically just investigating harm, we want to identify what the risks are. Actually, what we want to do is, I think, is swim further upstream than just identifying the risks. Once we've identified them, we want to mitigate them. So we don't want them to even appear on our risk register. We know what they are, and we want to put things in place proactively to present them even presenting to us as risks. What we're looking for is an alternative workplace where there's an opportunity for everybody to flourish at work. So to do this, we need a couple of things. We need to understand that mental health is more than the absence of disease and disorder. So when we're thinking about mental health, we're not thinking about mental illness. We're thinking about a different dimension. There's a difference between pathology and functioning. So when we think about mentally healthy workplace, it's not just about making sure that people don't become anxious or making sure that people don't become depressed. We're thinking about something else. We're thinking about growth and flourishing. And we have to do this because people who do have mental health problems, so mental illness, still have the capacity to flourish, that they can still do very well in the workplace. Just because somebody has a mental health diagnosis doesn't mean that they're not able to function in the workplace. The corollary of that is that just because you don't have a mental health problem in terms of a diagnosable disorder doesn't mean that you're not distressed. And if you think about a time when there's been a significant challenge in your family, a bereavement or something significant's happened, I mean, you don't automatically get a diagnosis of depression or anxiety, but you may find that you're not sleeping very well, you're not eating very well, and because of those things, you become fatigued, and that you find it difficult to focus when you're at work. So you bring those things into the workplace. So there is a distinction between mental illness and mental distress. Both mental health, mental illness, and mental well-being are fluid. that they change sometimes over relatively short periods of time, but certainly over the medium term, that there can be change in our capacity to cope with situations. So somebody who can cope at one point can't cope at another point. Somebody who generally copes very well, something may happen and they find they're not coping very well. So the challenge to the workplace is, how are we meant to identify these things? It's important that we don't just rely on policies and processes and procedures that we put in place and never review, that we need to look at how well those are functioning in helping us to do our job in terms of providing a healthy and safe workplace for people. That's where we get to the point about building positive workplace culture or building workplace communities. These are people that care for each other, look after each other, have each other's back. That's how you're going to know as a workplace about whether you're meeting your obligations to provide somewhere that's healthy and safe. Having a policy and protocol in place will not do that. That might just provide you some framework, ways of doing things. But if you're not actually engaging with the workforce, and that's all the workforce, because the leaders are also part of your workforce, if they're not being engaged with, you are not going to notice these changes that happen for perfectly normal reasons. I think the other thing to emphasize here is, and I've been asked this a few times, is whether people at work, the managers at work, therefore have to take responsibility for things that go on outside work. Well, the answer is no, you don't take responsibility for it. But if you're a good manager, you should have an interest in it. You should want to know what's going on outside work for your workforce. And why might that be? Well, if somebody's having a stressful time outside work and they want to keep it outside work, this is to do with home, it's not to do with work. But because of that, they're not sleeping very well. And so they're coming to work fatigued. And the first thing that they do on the construction site is they pick up a pneumatic nail gun or something that drives bolts into the concrete floor. These are people that are arming themselves. So actually, you as an employer taking an interest in how the person's doing outside work is your way of keeping other members of your workforce safe. So the challenge, therefore, is, can you build a community at work, a positive workplace culture where it's okay to talk about these things that are going on outside work as a way of protecting your own workforce? So PCBUs need to be aware of factors that contribute to both mental well-being and mental distress for their workers in the workplace, and this may include being aware of what's going on outside the workplace. This looks like a busy slide. It looks like a complicated picture, but I'll just draw your attention to a couple of points on this diagram, and it focuses on what do we mean by mental health, and gives us a clue about what do we mean by mentally healthy work. So if I can ask you just to look at the two axes, primary axes. So we've got the one that runs up and down, which is high subjective well-being symptoms. So this is people who are doing well. And at the bottom of that line is low subjective well-being symptoms. So these are people who are in distress. So this is a sort of the functioning dimension. The dimension that goes across from left to right is about pathology. So on the left-hand side of that line, high mental illness symptoms. So these are people who have a high level of mental health pathology or illness. And on the right-hand side is low mental illness symptoms. So these are people who are functioning well in terms of mental health. So people who have low levels of distress, so they're functioning really well and no mental health problems, no mental illness problems. These are people who are in the top right quadrant, complete mental health. But just be aware that there are three other dimensions there. There are people who are high level of mental illness and not doing very well, and these are people in the bottom left-hand side, complete mental illness. These are people who are really floundering, struggling. The other two quadrants are where people have a mixture. So they might have mental health problems, but be functioning really well, or where people don't have any mental health problems in terms of pathology, but are really struggling. And we will find people who fit into those two quadrants all the time in the workplace. We just need to be smart about identifying them. A couple of slides, and then maybe we'll see if there's any questions that I need to respond to. So this is from WorkSafe Segmentation and Insight Program Report 2019, and they asked people in the last 12 months what level of mental well-being have you had. These are not, while they use the title depression and anxiety, these are not clinically diagnosed. These are people who identify themselves as having depression or anxiety. 20% indicated that in the previous 12 months had experienced depression, 31% anxiety, 60% had experienced stress, and 15% had experienced bullying or harassment in the workplace. All these relate to in the workplace. At the moment, WorkSafe on our website, the guidance that we've developed to a point where I think it's pretty good, really, is the bullying and harassment space. Our next priority is developing guidance and materials, self-assessment tools, audit tools around workplace stress. And that will be coming up in the first part of next year. Stress is a tricky thing, because having some stress in your life is okay. I remember years ago watching the camera pan along the All Blacks in the World Cup game when they played England. This must have been a long time ago. Some of you may not even remember it. And it got to Jonah Lomu, and that's how long ago it was. And he looked absolutely wired. And I would have thought it was experiencing quite a high level of stress. But if you look at the diagram here, the stress response curve, he would have been absolutely focused, and I'd say at a point of optimum stress, or maybe going over into stress overload. That's the game where he ran over the top of Mike Catt and scored 3 amazing tries. The problem that we have with stress in the workplace is it's very subjective, that some people cope with higher levels of stress than other people. It makes it difficult and to assess, but what we need to know is what a person's level of stress in the workplace is. And what their capacity is. So stress describes a person's physical, mental and emotional response when they feel that the demands on them exceed their abilities and or their resources to cope. So that's the sort of dimension that we need to be paying attention to when we're looking at stress in the workplace. Really important we look at it, though, because 60% of people indicate that they've experienced significant workplace stress in the previous 12 months. I'm just going to throw this slide up really quickly. This comes from the Segmentation and Insight report. If you look at the bottom line of numbers there, you will see it relates to poor mental well-being. So this is the line that interests me and my team most. What I've done is I've just pulled the high figures off that table. Now, traditionally, WorkSafe has focused on primary industries, manufacturing, forestry, agriculture, construction, and transport and logistics. Those are the areas where fatalities occur. But if you look at this list, this is the list based on the previous slide of where poor mental well-being occurs, and you'll see that there's no overlap in those industries. That this is a completely different domain of practice, really. That information media, telecommunications, this is 58% of people who work in those industries indicated that in the previous 12 months, they've experienced either depression or anxiety. Professional services, scientific and technical services, 46%. Fishing, which may well count really as a primary industry, 45%. Arts and recreation, accommodation of food services, hospitality services, health and social assistance, education and training, and electricity and gas. These are the areas where psychosocial harm or mental health in the workplace is a major problem. These are the areas where people deal with people mostly. And so it's unsurprising, really, that if you think about psychosocial harms, it occurs in the environments where people are having to interact with other people in the workplace. Phil, I'm just wondering whether there's any questions that we need to.
Yeah, one question I had was around. There's a couple come up on the screen as well, but around HR. HR traditionally have owned stress, well-being,
Yeah.
not necessarily mental health, but there's a crossover of health and safety, drugs and alcohol. What are your thoughts around that? And do they have the sort of the, how to put this politically correctly, competency to manage this area?
The answer is yes and no, really. We've just done some work with a construction company in Auckland, where the HR department, along with the health and safety people, have done a marvelous job in implementing some positive workplace response to mentally healthy work. So absolutely, HR have a role, but I think it does. I think again, it's something that they might struggle to do on their own because of their traditional orientation and because of the other things they're being asked to do. I was talking to somebody in WorkSafe recently, and they were saying something like 45,000 health and safety reps around New Zealand. I mean, that seems like a huge army of people potentially who can climb on board with this and who are already on board with mentally healthy work to some extent. That I think health and safety specialists as well. Now, obviously, bigger companies will have their own health and safety people. And the question is, where do the smaller PCBUs and the SMEs get their support from? So there are people out there, and it is connecting the dots. But I think you're right that it does take a little bit of a mind shift and a practice shift for some of the very traditional HR departments to take this on.
One of the questions was around from Chris, thanks Chris, around how do SMEs and sole traders who lack resources manage mental health, where do they go to?
Yep. Well, if you look at the bullying and harassment guidelines that we've developed one for workers, one for PCBUs, and one for SMEs, and that is an approach that we're going to take with all future guidance in this area, that we're going to be looking at core messaging for small and medium-sized enterprises. Another initiative that I was really interested in that the intervention team here is doing is with the residential construction area, where they are piloting a program with larger PCBUs mentoring or partnering with SMEs and smaller PCBUs to share expertise. And I think that is a really innovative approach that, it's like the big brother, big sister helping the smaller brother, smaller sister to understand what's going on. And I think that's a really positive development.
Great, thanks for that. I'll keep you going. Probably got another 10 minutes left of the presentation, and then there's a few more questions popping up on all types of topics. I'll keep going.
Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the risks, and you may know this, and then I'll just talk a little bit about what our work plan is for the rest of the year, which is not very long, but I mean the financial year, which takes us to the middle of 2021 and beyond. So as I mentioned before, the risks to mentally healthy work seem to fall in 4 areas, but 3 main areas. And the first of these are dynamic risks. And so they're things that we can do something about in theory. So the first is work design. So this is about workflow. It's about what the amount of control people have over their work, high and low job demands, not being clear about what their work involved, working remotely or in isolation, not having the support and resources they need to engage in, and lack of job security is a significant issue here as well. The second is the work environment, so poor work conditions, so people working with poor air quality, noise, extreme temperatures. I mean, these are not conducive to people being focused on their work particularly, and there's people making mistakes and becoming injured. Also, it's just not a very pleasant place to work. So these are things also that in terms of the work environment that we might want to focus on. But the primary one for mentally healthy work is around relationships. So this is poor organizational change management. And with COVID-19, there has been so much change management that's been going on. People having to work in different ways, leading to now maybe people choosing to work in different ways. So the real challenge about how that's managed and how that continues to be managed in a positive way. Poor organizational justice, so people feel like they're not getting a fair shake. Poor workplace relations, violence and traumatic events, low recognition and reward. So these are risk factors that potentially we can do something about. As I mentioned, the there is this fourth risk factor or risk constellation, which is around individual factors. So these are individual disposition, your personality, and a person's personality is their enduring way of being in the world, of interacting with people. And there's a lot of psychology around personality and personality change. The theory is, and the practice is, that it is possible for people to change personality characteristics, but it takes a long time and takes a lot of effort. And generally, that's not the approach that people take. That what people take is a wraparound approach to building workplace environments that actually can cope with a person's with different individual dispositions, but also people's cultural background, social supports, their personal factors outside work, habitual coping mechanisms. That these are individual factors that to some extent we can change or not change. Where do these come from? So if you look at the first column here, these are from WorkSafe Victoria's identification of the causes of workplace injuries. So that is a list that we have, that's a list of their items, and we have organized them into the three bands there of work design, work environment, and social organizational context. It's interesting, after we did that, we then look back at the Collins 2014, which are the Canadian standards. Now, they don't talk about risks, they talk about mitigation. So what is it that helps to address these risks? And you will see that they fall into the three same constellations. I think it's interesting that most of their mitigations in terms of mental psychological health or mentally healthy work fall in the relationship area, which is where we would say most of the concerns arise. It was interesting to meet a few months ago with a person from one of the government departments who talked to her people working in her organisation about what workers want, and she talked to the leaders and gave them the list of from the Canadian standards. And what the leaders, the managers, said was that what workers want is recognition and reward. And you'll see that 3 bullet points up from the bottom on the right-hand column. So the managers and leaders saw that what workers were after was recognition and reward for their effort. Actually, what she then went to the workers and said, what is it that you want in the workplace? What is it that would help? And they said civility and respect. So they wanted to be treated well. I think it's really interesting about the differential there, that they all fit within relationships, but they have a different orientation. I think it's fascinating that the workers said civility and respect. So the role of our team, you can find these on the website. So our role is to champion mentally healthy work, to provide high-level specialist and evidence-based advice. So to support employers to create mentally healthy work and mentally healthy workspaces, we want that to be business as usual, not an add-on. We want to ensure, because we are the workplace regulator, that PCBs understand their obligations under HASWA, their duty of care, and that with that duty of care comes obligations. We want to assist our own internal staff to be able to support employers and to support workers to develop positive workplace culture and positive mentally healthy work-oriented leadership, and to ensure that that those things are provided in the workplace as much as is practicably possible. And we will do that by working to design and develop resources and guidance and to provide support. On the right-hand side, I'm sure you're all aware of the 5 ways to well-being that are supported by the Health Promotion Agency and the Mental Health Foundation in New Zealand, but actually come from the UK and are internationally recognised. And there's a whole heap of research that supports these as being important ways to well-being. They are connect, keep learning, be active, give of your time, words, and your presence, and to take notice. And we would support these as mechanisms for promoting and developing mentally healthy workplaces. And this is our work plan. So it does divide into the 3 areas. We've got some internal work that we're doing, and some external work which revolves around practice, and some external work that revolves around policy. So internally, we're developing our team, and actually we've got quite a long way. We've got 1 team member to recruit, but we're quite a long way towards that. I think the second one's quite important. It's establishing a mentally healthy work stem and branches. So we accept and we recognise that a lot of really excellent work has been going on in the mentally healthy workspace within WorkSafe before our team was stood up, continues to be ongoing, and it's work that to this point we haven't had much involvement in, but we are supporting because it's excellent work, and there's a lot of work being going on in the community. Our role is to provide the stem, really, is to provide the hub, the sort of the grounding, the roots, the evidence, the nourishment of this work. But to support all these buds and leaves and flowers growing at the end of the branches, that we can't do it all, that what we are is really a conduit to. We'll do some of the work ourselves, but we're a conduit to other work being developed. So we sort of have this sort of stem and branches approach to the work we're doing. Partly being the stem means that we're collecting and using data. And so at the moment, the research and evaluation team within WorkSafe are developing a project, and it's out for tender at the moment on using the Copenhagen Psychosocial Questionnaire as a national survey device to gather data about what's going on in mentally healthy work around New Zealand. And then off the back of that, we will use a subset of that and other measures to collect data in a more continuous way. We're developing our internal systems, building our internal capability to respond to and support concerns, but also to be proactive, and also looking at the well-being of our own staff who are consistently being exposed to difficult situations. In terms of external practice, developing guidance and guidelines, possibly with an option of approved code of practice, although that's still in discussion. Particularly, we're focusing at the moment on working from home and workplace stress guidelines, as I mentioned. Building our networks and building our sector engagements. So the Kaiarahi project is the project that the implementation team are doing with residential construction, and they're also doing a project with the health and safety reps, which is excellent. We're also looking at engagement with the health and social care sector and other sectors. So we're trying to build a community of practice around those things, but we're also engaged in policy. So we do recognise that WorkSafe has a role in shaping the regulatory landscape around mentally healthy work, a cross-sector engagement to establish mentally healthy work as business as usual. This is really important for us. Engagement with national and international experts. So we need to be evidence-based, insight-led and innovative in the work we do. And the direction we're heading is to promote caring and resilient workplace communities for all in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is where we want to end up. He aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What's the most important thing in the world? It's people, it's people, it's people. And that's all I've got for you.
Great, John, that was a pretty good informative presentation. Actually, people asked, a couple of people on the chat asked for your copy of the slides, so if that's possible.
I'll send them to you, Philip.
Send them to me, I'll get it out to people over the next day or so. So thanks for that. One question from Jerry, which is quite a good question actually. Thanks, Jerry. Is there any work done on the correlation between workplaces that have high engagement as measured by Gallup or other surveys and high mentally healthy workplaces?
There's not. When I suggested that the characteristics of the industries or the sectors that have higher mental health problems is different from those that have high fatalities and sort of the traditional workplace focus, that's based on internal data. So it's a segmentation and insight report, but also talking to our own general inspectorate here, that the data that they have internally about the calls they get suggests that there's a difference. I think it'd be fascinating to look at whether there's like independent data, external data, and I'm hoping that that the research and evaluation team here, who are going to roll out the Copenhagen survey, will find just that. I think it'd be fantastic. I mean, it does make sense, you know, that you're not really going to get bullied by argument with a log or argument with a brick, or, you know, you're going to fall off things, or things are going to hit you. You know, when you get verbally and physically attacked are when you're dealing with other people. So, I mean, it makes sense, but I don't have the data about it.
Good on you. This is you might be able to answer this question, but sort of, I know WorkSafe sometimes has challenges trying to prosecute under bullying and harassment because the standard's quite high. Is there any sort of, or on the sort of same topic, is there any sort of potential ideas or planned changes to the HASWA, particularly around notifications, that type of thing?
Yeah, I might not be the best person to answer that. I don't believe there's any thoughts about changing the Health and Safety at Work Act, or I think the nearest we might get is, and we need to be clearer about the guidance that we offer, and whether that becoming clear on that and setting a very clear benchmark means developing an approved code of practice. That's still a discussion that's being had. But they are just starting to get prosecutions in Australia, but they're years ahead of us in terms of this sort of particular piece of work. It is a lever that we need to be able to pull. That you know, some people are being very significantly injured by bullying and harassment in the workplace, and I think it's entirely appropriate that when we have the evidence and when we can make the case, that we take the prosecution. The thing is, it's so difficult to do because of the subjective nature. We just need to, I mean, it's such a big grey area. We need to reduce the grey when we can to make the black and white clearer, but to accept that there will always be this grey area. So yeah, WorkSafe is not stepping away from that. We just need to do some more work on it, and we're going to do that.
Great. So there's a couple of questions here. One around the overseas practices. One's the UK HSE stress management tool.
Yeah.
Is that relevant to New Zealand? And there's also Ruth talked about New South Wales producing a code of practice.
Yep.
Can you talk about those tools? Are they any good? Can we use them, or is WorkSafe looking to do something similar? Or
so I'll take the second one first. The reason why we're thinking about a code of practice is because New South Wales have a draft, and I think their consultation period ended at the end of October. It'll be really interesting to see what they do with that. We just need to bear in mind that they work under a different regulatory framework, that they have a claims compensation system that we just don't have. And we have ACC, but it doesn't cover mentally healthy work injuries in anywhere near the same way. So so I think we're looking with interest to see how that develops. It is a different thing, having an approved code of practice. It's quite difficult to do. It needs ministerial approval, and so it takes a long time and it's very difficult to change. So the question is that the best way to go? But it might just give us a little bit more leverage that we might need. So that's a work in progress. HSE, they have moved towards having a primary focus on workplace stress, and you can sort of understand it. Why do people bully other people at work? Well, maybe it's because they're under so much stress. They've got tight deadlines, they've got too much work to do, they've got stuff happening at home. So it may be that bullying and harassment is the intermediate step, in a sense, that if we want to swim further upstream and address that, we address workplace stress. Of course, there will always be bad buggers at work, people who do bad stuff, and that's to do with the individual factors. That's a different solution. If the problem is high levels of workplace stress, and that's why people are bullying, let's address the stress. And it looks like that's what the HSE have taken as an orientation. So their materials are really good, really useful, and we are using those as a basis for developing our own materials.
In my experience, it was not as good as yours, but a lot of it's down to poor leadership and things like that.
Yeah. So we can address it through other routes. Yeah.
One question here, which is more around implementation. Some person's getting pushback from his company as he wants to add psychosocial to his monthly metrics. This will include stress and fatigue and bullying. Is anything you suggest to get it over the line? Because they're going through a large restructuring at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. It is an interesting challenge that, you know, what impact does psychosocial harms or mentally healthy work have on the bottom line? There is an increasing amount of data that actually, if you have a mentally unhealthy workplace, it's bad for the bottom line. And if you have a mentally healthy workplace, it's good for the bottom line. So sometimes I think if managers, you know, 1.5 times the loss of productivity due to presenteeism rather than absenteeism. So absenteeism you can count. Presenteeism is much more difficult to count. This is people being at work when they're being they're suboptimal in terms of productivity, and they really shouldn't be there. So I think there's all these hidden things that just being aware of mentally healthy work or mental health in the workplace just gives us a bit more insight into things that managers might really care about. The other thing, though, Philip, I would say is it's not just about health and safety. It's about a moral imperative that if companies say, and a number do, that our workforce is our primary asset, then making a statement like that brings obligations. That, you know, that you don't just get a machine and turn it on and not give it any maintenance. You maintain it because it cost you $100,000. Actually, your workforce is costing you a lot more than that. So why not put some money into maintaining them in the same way you do your machines? And that means looking after their mental health, at least partly. That's part of what it means, looking after their mental health.
Yep. Here's a good question from Jeffrey. Can you name or prepare to name a employer or government department or a company who is doing a good work in this area?
Yep. So the piece of work that we've been doing, and we're going to put that information on our website, is GJ Gardeners Residential Construction. And so we've just made a video with them that they're just editing at the moment. They're really cool with the idea of us using them as an exemplar of good work. My understanding is that there are, you know, companies like Xero, really good. The thing is, these are big PCBUs, and I think what we need is who have lots of resources. I think what we also need are some small companies. And it's not just that we don't want to give them more work, so everybody rings them up and says, how are you doing it? I think it's also our job to talk to them and say, this is how this company did this. These are the things that they put in place, and this is where you can get the resources to do it yourself. So this is a sort of a better work orientation, is from learning, you know, that there's however many 2 or 3% of companies that are not doing it well. We're really missing a trick here if we don't pay attention to the 97% of companies that do it well and learn from them. They know how to do this.
Yeah, a question, interesting question from Philippa. The impact of working long hours on mental health, and what is the globally acceptable level of hours of work? Yeah, so it's quite an interesting question. Any thoughts on that?
It is. There is some guidance around this. I'm not sure what it is. I'm sure it probably varies from industry to industry, and it depends on the sort of work you're doing. It's interesting. There's a really a good document released by the British Psychological Society post-COVID about working from home, and they found that one thing that happens is you get work intensification, so people working harder, and the fear of managers is that when people are working from home, they're shirking it. You know, they're not working very hard. But the research suggests that no, if people feel that if workers believe that they're being trusted by their employer to work at home, that they take their work more seriously, and they have a real sort of moral driver. So they turn their phone on at 7 o'clock in the morning, and when they're eating their breakfast, and start answering their emails. They don't turn it off till 7 o'clock at night. If they've been out for a walk in the lunchtime because the sun's nice and bright, then they'll work through till 6 o'clock. They'll read documents. You know, it's the work intensification. So I think people generally take their work really seriously. I would say it's not a matter of hours. It's a matter of whether people are getting the other things. You know, it's not, work is part of life. It's not work-life balance. Work is your life. It's part of it. And it's whether you're actually being able to achieve the other things in your life, like stay connected with your family and friends, engage in the other activities that you want to engage in, play sport, go to the movies, read a book. If your work is spilling over into your outside work life to such an extent that those things are not being achieved, then that's not so good.
A question around resources. I haven't looked at the WorkSafe website for a while, but where do you think the best place if a PCBU or a health sector person is looking for some resources that can be put into place immediately, where would you suggest they go?
You can look at the WorkSafe website, but
Yep.
please be tolerant because it's not well developed in terms of mentally healthy work. If you give us 6 months, it will be completely different.
Right.
In the meantime, the Australian states and the Australian federal Safe Work Australia have some excellent resources available. They are very happy for WorkSafe New Zealand to disseminate those. Sometimes not even, they say just use it. So I think the Australians are really good. I think Canada, I found some amazing resources on the British WorkSafe British Columbia website. British Columbia, Vancouver, is that British Columbia? Anyway, Toronto has some really interesting. Ontario has some really interesting resources. So I'd say WorkSafe sites in Australia and Canada, and then the HSE in the UK at the moment. In New Zealand, it's always worth looking at the Mental Health Foundation, Health Promotion Agency. They have some great resources as well, and they've done some good work with some of the primary industries.
Right.
But check back on WorkSafe in 6 months.
Great. Any final questions, please flick them in. We've got probably a couple more minutes left, but just a quick comment from Angela. She says, as an HR professional, I expect the whole of the business responsible for ensuring mental health lead from the top, not a singular team, which is a good comment. I agree with that.
Absolutely.
So any final comments or thoughts, John?
Well, it's two things really. It does come down to leadership and building positive workplace communities. I mean, we lead. It needs to be led from the top, and that's so that the right resources can be allocated, and that includes time to take this seriously. Recognizing that your workforce is your biggest and most expensive asset. So it comes from the top. We probably need to do better at ensuring leaders have the resources they need to be able to lead effectively in this area. The second area about positive workplace culture, it is everybody's job. That you can't rely on your HR team, as the comment was made. You can't rely on your health and safety inspectors. It's having the transparency so that people can raise these issues and without fear or prejudice. They don't feel that their people are going to think they're crazy or that risk losing their job or being discriminated against. The other thing though and the reason I say it's not just about a workplace culture, but it's also about a workplace community, is again that if we do this right, this can make a contribution to all of Aotearoa New Zealand. That having positive workplace communities, it potentially involves the families of workers, the friends of workers. So these people can learn skills that are good to take outside the workplace as well. And the ideal will be, somebody learns something at work and they go home and their son or daughter has been at school learning about mental health, and then the mum or dad who's been at work can go home and have this conversation and build resilience and caring in the family as well. So this is about building community. So leadership, culture and community.
Great. Thank you, John. I think from everyone on the call, it's been a very interesting discussion and presentation. And I think a lot of people are really, most people I talk to are really keen. This is probably number one challenge we've got as a country in the world probably. So I think everyone's right behind you and wanting to support you. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone coming on the call today. And as I said, we'll get the video out, the podcast out, as well as slides. So thank you for attending today. Have a good rest of the day and the week.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.